There is a pillar in the dungeon of Chillon Castle. It is the fifth pillar from the entrance. It stands in a low vaulted cellar, the floor of which is lake rock. The castle is built so close to Lake Geneva that the foundations are the lake bed itself. The water is visible through a grate in the floor. The dungeon smells of cold water and old stone. Around the base of that pillar, worn into the rock, is a groove. It was made by a man's feet, walking back and forth for 6 years, chained to the pillar. The chain was long enough that he could pace 4 steps one way, 4 steps back, and he paced it so many times for so many years that his feet wore the stone. His name was François Bonivard. He was imprisoned for the crime of believing the wrong things about who should govern Geneva. He was chained to that pillar from 1530 to 1536 in a dungeon lit by a single window too high to see out of, over a lake he could hear but not see. He survived. He was released. He became the subject of one of the most famous poems in the English language, and Lord Byron, visiting the castle 280 years later, carved his own name into the same pillar. The groove is still there. Byron's name is still there. The chain ring is still in the pillar. Chillon Castle sits on a small rocky island, really a peninsula, connected to the shore by a drawbridge, in Lake Geneva, near the town of Mortar. The lake is immediately around it on 3 sides. The water is extraordinarily clear and deep green. The site has been fortified since at least the Bronze Age. The Romans used it. The bishops of Sion held it in the early medieval period. By the 12th century, it was in the hands of the counts of Savoy, who transformed it into one of the most sophisticated castle palaces in Europe. A fortified residence, administrative center, and toll collection point for the mountain pass above. The location is strategic genius. The road from Italy to northern Europe ran through the narrow gap between the lake and the Alps. Anyone using that road passed within arrow range of Chillon. The counts of Savoy charged toll. The road was the only practical route. The toll was paid. Inside, the castle is less grim than its reputation suggests. The Great Hall has large windows looking over the lake. The chapel has 13th century frescoes still visible on the walls. The counts who lived here lived well. It is only when you go below, down into the vaulted cellar that sits directly on the lake rock, that the castle shows its other face. François Bonivard was born around 1493 in Savoy. He was educated by the church and became prior of the monastery of Saint-Victor in Geneva. He developed a passionate commitment to 2 interconnected causes: the independence of Geneva from Savoyard control and the Protestant Reformation. Both positions put him directly in conflict with the Duke of Savoy, Charles III, who controlled Chillon and considered Geneva part of his domain. Bonivard was captured twice. The first time in 1519, he was held at Grolly Castle for 2 years before being ransomed. He was released, went back to Geneva, and continued his political activity. A man of genuine conviction, or perhaps simply one who had not yet learned his lesson. In 1530, Savoyard forces captured him on the road. This time, there would be no ransom. He was taken to Chillon and chained to the 5th pillar in the dungeon. The chain allowed him to pace approximately 4 steps in each direction. The dungeon received light from a single window, set high in the wall on the lakeside. Light, but no view. He could hear the water. He could not see it. He was given food and water. He was not tortured. He was simply confined in almost total isolation for 6 years. Solitary confinement, modern psychology tells us, produces measurable brain damage within weeks. Bonivard endured it for 6 years. What kept him sane, if he remained entirely sane, was the pacing. 4 steps, turn, 4 steps, turn. The groove in the stone deepened year by year. He had no books, no company. He could hear eventually, when the world above him was changing, the sounds of conflict as the Bernese forces approached. But he did not know what they meant. On March 29, 1536, the forces of Bern captured Chillon Castle. They found Bonivard in the dungeon and released him. He had been chained to the pillar for 6 years and 1 month. He walked out, he could still walk, into a world that had changed completely. Geneva was free of Savoy. The Reformation had transformed the religious landscape of Europe. He had missed all of it, underground, listening to water. In June 1816, the poet Lord Byron visited Chillon Castle with his friend Percy Bysshe Shelley. The visit was part of what became one of the most famous summers in literary history. Mary Shelley was with them and would begin writing Frankenstein that same summer. Byron visited the dungeon. He saw the pillar. He saw the groove worn into the stone by Bonivard's feet. He was so moved that he wrote the sonnet on Chillon that evening. A narrative poem describing the strange psychological process by which the prisoner eventually ceases to want freedom. My very chains and I grew friends, to make us what we are. Before leaving the dungeon, Byron carved his own name into the fifth pillar. It is still there. Bonivard is the most famous, but the castle's dungeons were not empty before or after. The records that survive from the castle's administrative peak are extraordinary. Among those prisoners were people accused of heresy, followers of the Waldensian movement. Their confessions, extracted under torture, survive in the castle archives. The year is 1348. The Black Death is sweeping Europe. The official needs a culprit. The torture chamber at Chillon produced a lie that killed thousands. The Black Death was sweeping through a European city, people collapsing in streets, carts of the dead, the chaos of mass death. The confessions, extracted by torture at Chillon, produced the first documented accusation that Jews poisoned the wells to cause the Black Death. This lie, traveling faster than the truth, spread across Europe and contributed directly to a wave of anti-Jewish pogroms in which thousands of people were murdered. The consequence of the lie made at Chillon was visibility as each affected town appears, the map filling with the spread of mass death. In 1798, Napoleon incorporated Switzerland into the Helvetic Republic. Chillon lost its administrative function. The last prisoners were released and the gates opened. By the time Byron arrived in 1816, the castle was empty, slightly ruinous, and already becoming a tourist attraction. Chillon Castle receives approximately 400,000 visitors a year. It is the most visited historic monument in Switzerland. Its silhouette on Lake Geneva, the towers and battlements reflected in the green water, the Alps behind, is one of the iconic images of the country. The interior is remarkably complete. The Great Hall has been restored. The frescoes in the chapel are still visible. The kitchens and storerooms are intact. The castle feels inhabited in a way that many more ruined sites do not. It is only when you go below that the reality shifts. And in the dungeon, the fifth pillar is still there. The groove in the floor is still there, roped off now, but visible. The chain ring is still in the pillar, and Byron is still carved in the stone. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people file past that pillar. They look at the groove and try to imagine 6 years of pacing, 4 steps at a time. In the dark, over a lake they could hear but not see. Most of them cannot hold the thought for more than a few seconds. Then they move on to the next room. Bonivard had no next room. The most beautiful prisons are still prisons. Chillon is extraordinary to look at. The lake, the Alps, the reflections, the medieval towers. Byron thought it was the most romantic place he'd ever seen. He was probably right. François Bonivard was there for 6 years and could not see any of it. He could only hear water, pace 4 steps in the dark, and wait for a world that had changed completely before it remembered to let him out. The groove is still in the stone. His feet made it. You can still see it.